I'd like to talk a little bit about our lead paint, how we handle lead paint. So we renovate houses. A lot of them were built before 1978. Anytime a house was built before 1978, we have to do things a little bit differently. And let's just talk a little bit about why that is. Lead paint, a real issue, can be a real problem. It doesn't just happen to people who live in decrepit houses that haven't been maintained. This family was lead poisoned by a painter renovating their fancy house in Portland, Oregon. Any amount of lead is very bad, especially for developing brains, kids, babies in utero. Very small amounts cause permanent brain damage. It's really not something we can afford to mess around with. We could really hurt somebody. And it causes all kinds of problems for adults as well. The health of all of us is at risk if we don't handle lead paint correctly on our job sites. The health of our workers, the health of other companies, and even the health of our kids if we take lead dust home on our clothes. This is a quick graph showing, sometimes people say, oh, lead paint, that's an old problem, that, you know, people aren't getting lead poisoned very much anymore. It's true that lead poisoning has been dropping ever since they stopped putting lead in gasoline, but it's still way, way, way higher than it ever was before industry took all this lead out of the ground and put it in our environment. And the main problem is dust. So deteriorating paint might be what you're thinking of. You know, you're picturing a house with peeling paint all over it. That is a big problem. But another big problem is any friction surface. So anytime you slide a window up or down, or you have a door that's rubbing when it shuts, hinges, that grounds the dust up very finely and gets all over the floor. And babies especially are crawling around, they get dust all over themselves. And this is why anything we do to windows that have lead paint is a big deal, because especially double hung windows, there's usually a lot of finely ground lead dust in the pockets around the window. The other big issue that can cause lead dust in a house is us. Contractors can get dust all over a house. So this even happens in very expensive houses with very high-end contractors. So even President Bush's dog got lead poisoned by a contractor working in the White House. Why is that? Whenever we do activities that we used to normally do on houses, we create lead dust. So hand sanding, power sanding, demolition, all of these result in more lead dust on the ground than the federal standard, which is represented by this line here with the asterisks. Get this set up here. So this is the federal safety standard, which actually turns out that was chosen just by a practical level that you could get to. That's still enough lead dust to cause lead poisoning in 1 out of 6 kids who live in a house at that level. So how do we handle it? There's 2 different methods, if you will. There's abatement, which is sort of a big, fancy, complicated program, and the renovation, repair, and painting rule, which is a somewhat less complicated program that at the end of the day works about as well if you do it correctly. So we do the RRP rule, and we also do third-party independent testing to make sure that that was done correctly. Okay, let me just step through how our process works right now. Let me hand these out too. If you can pass these around. I only printed enough of these for production folks because everyone else has it in the office. The first question to ask is, was this structure originally built before 1978? So if we can prove that we find a record that a house was built after 1978, we just keep a copy of that record in the lead paint documentation folder on the server, and we're done. That's it. We have a record the house was built after 1978, we're done. If the house wasn't built 1978 or later, then we have to take some extra steps. So the first one is this blue box here. The project leader is going to get the sign-off that they've delivered the lead paint brochure to the clients. This is a normal part of our sales process, right? So we're already doing this. We do want to keep a copy of that in that lead paint documentation folder. And then we're going to arrange to have the house tested for lead. So that's this box here. Production usually handles that. So we hire a lead paint testing company. They come out with a special gun, which is actually really cool. It's like it uses radioactivity to detect lead. They cost $20,000, so we're not going to buy one anytime soon. But they come out and they hold it up against a surface, and it beeps and tells you this has lead paint on it or it doesn't. So they'll test. Usually we do the whole house because you never know what we're going to end up working on. And usually that works out in the client's favor because most of the houses we test have very little lead paint. So we've tested, I was just looking at this, we've tested maybe 25 houses in the last 2 years. Out of all those houses, only I think 10 had any lead paint at all, and only about 5 had lead paint in areas that we were intending to work. So the testing really works in the client's favor because we can avoid having to do any kind of special demolition that might cost a little more. If we know there's no lead paint, then we just treat it like we would anything else. So after we do our testing, we find out if there's lead paint where we're working. If there's no lead paint where we're working, then we're done. Just keep a record of that. All the lead paint was somewhere else, we're done. If there is lead paint in our work area, we're going to hire a special subcontractor who's trained and equipped to do this renovation, repair, and painting. So this is usually handled by production. There are some special insurance requirements that Dave Brandt is working out right now. But we think our standard subcontractors we've been doing with this are going to be able to meet it. We've had a couple of meetings with them lately, and they seem to be on board with wanting to keep doing this work for us. We have added a couple of new things in this phase of the work. The first is bring me out to the job to meet with the job site lead, and we'll make sure we're all on the same page about the work practices that we're going to have to follow. And this is, again, like any phase of work, there are going to be some key things for project managers to watch and make sure that the subcontractors are doing correctly, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. And that's the gist of that. Hire the right people, meet with them ahead of time to make sure that they're planning to do everything correctly, and then follow through and make sure they do it correctly. After they're done doing the work, we're going to hire a third-party testing company to come in and test the area that they worked. They'll actually check the floor. I have some pictures of that in a minute. And then once that test passes and we're clear, then anyone can go in there and work because all the lead has been dealt with and there's no hazard for anybody. But in the time frame when they're working until we're done passing the test, no one else is supposed to be in there working other than those people who are part of that subcontracting company. So that is going to be a little bit of a delay if we have, especially if they fail the test. They're going to have to come back and clean again, and we'll have to retest. And that whole process, it takes 2 or 3 days to get the test results back anyway. So if they fail it could add a whole week onto your project. So we're just going to want to make sure they clean well. Go ahead, Larry.
What are the initials BP?
Best practices.
Best practice.
Yeah, that's me. Yeah. The initials BP means me. So again, we're going to arrange for post-testing. We're going to have this clearance testing done. Once that passes, then we're pretty much all done. Again, there's some special record keeping we have to do, which I will help with. The companies that do this know a lot about it. I know a lot about it, so I'll get with them and make sure we have all the records. Okay? Let me cover some of these work rules just so that project managers know what they should be looking at. The subcontractors have to follow these. So first of all, there's a special role in this rule. There's someone called a certified renovator. They'll have a certificate with their picture on it. It's supposed to be on the job site with them while they're working. And they're supposed to be present while the setup is being done and while the cleanup is being done. And they're also supposed to be available by telephone anytime in the middle. They can also, those renovators can train other workers to do the actual work, but this certified renovator has to be on site at the beginning and the end for the setup and cleanup. Okay? A couple other quick things about it. There are some things that we can never do to a surface that hasn't been proven not to have lead paint. So if we have testing that says this is not lead paint, we can do this stuff, but if we think it could be, then we're not allowed to do this. No torching, no hot heat guns, and no grinding or machine sanding. Obviously those make a lot of particles, and that's the bad problem. For indoors, a few key things. We have signage requirements. Everything has to be contained with plastic. You have to work with wet methods, and then there's some special cleanup and testing, as we talked about. So first of all, there's two different requirements for the signs, but you can put it all in one sign. It has to say danger, do not enter, and also do not eat, drink, or smoke. So they make signs that say all these things. These signs have to be set up outside of the work area. And it's important to keep homeowners, pets, kids, other tradespeople out of the work area. Sorry, I also want to point out at the doorways you're supposed to put up a barrier that keeps any dust from getting in or out of the work area. You're supposed to contain the work area, so cover everything that says heavy sheeting is what the rule officially says. You can tape it with any kind of tape. The abatement rules, they call out what kind of plastic and tape you use. RRP, you can use whatever you want. If you're not doing an entire room, you have to cover an area 6 feet out away from the work area, and you have to tape it to the floor so you can vacuum it later. If you don't move everything out of the room, you have to cover it and securely tape it. And any HVAC ducts have to be covered and taped. Pretty simple. This is the kind of stuff we might do anyway just for dust. You're supposed to work everything wet, so there should always be sprayers on hand. You can either use the pump-up kind or you can use the little kind you squeeze to get the spray to come out. So everything's supposed to be wet when you take it apart, and then after you take it apart and you have a lot of dust, you're supposed to wet that all down so it doesn't make billows of dust when you're trying to clean it up. At the end of the work, you're supposed to seal up all the debris. Everything you take out is supposed to go into plastic bags or be securely wrapped in plastic sheeting, and that should all go into the dumpster all securely wrapped. So you can't just take pieces of trim out and throw them in the dumpster. Everything has to be wrapped up. All the plastic sheeting has to be misted down with water and wiped down, and then folded inward, they say. Then at the end of the whole process, you HEPA vacuum and wash the floor. So in the official rule, it says you can do one or the other, but I've talked to a few people who've told me that if you're actually working with any lead paint, you're going to need to do both. You usually have to wash twice to pass the clearance testing. So it's a little bit hard to hit. You really have to be very, very, very clean. And then this is a person doing the clearance testing. They just take a special wipe, cover a 1 square foot area with the wipe, and then they send that off to a lab, and the lab tells you how much lead is on the wipe. So that's how it works. So vacuum, wash, vacuum, clearance test.
Hey, Doug,
Yes.
how long is the turnaround time for that third-party test so you know if you're clean or not?
So you can do a rush test for, the question is how long does it take to get the test results back. A rush test is 24 hours, and that's about $60 for each work area. You can do, a normal test is 2 to 3 days, and that's about 30. And from what I've heard, a lot of times the normal tests come back in 24 hours. They just don't promise. So it depends on how much of a hurry you're in. So they're going to have to clean up pretty well on the inside. On the outside, it's kind of similar. You have to put up the same signs. You're supposed to control access to the work area, which in this example you can see they've put up, I guess, stakes and tape to prevent, so people know not to walk into the work area. You have to close all the doors and windows, put plastic out a minimum of 10 feet from the house, and it's supposed to be sealed to the house, taped to the house. So this is something I've seen. Sometimes people just put out the plastic and don't attach it to the house, and all the stuff, the paint chips fall down into the dirt, and you're supposed to clean it all up when you're done. One quick question on this 10-foot, or point on this 10-foot minimum. That really says, that is the minimum. It says if it's windy conditions or if you're close to the property line, you may have to use vertical containment, which I guess would mean, you know, you'd have a scaffold up with plastic draped on that behind you while you're working on the house so the chips can't blow out into the yard or to the neighbor's yard. One other quick thing, all the workers who are in this work area are supposed to be wearing Tyvek suits, respirators, gloves, shoe covers. Whenever they leave, they're supposed to HEPA vacuum themselves so that they're not taking dust out of the work area. It's important for everyone to wash their hands and face. And they even say wash your clothes separately from the rest of your family, because even with all those protections, you can still get dust. So again, we're going to do this testing. What we've found for the pre-work inspection is it's, you know, varies in cost, $400 to $700 roughly. It takes 1 to 2 hours, and the clearance testing, not as expensive, but again, it does take a few days. All right, any questions on any of that?
What's your recommendation after
contractor goes in, puts up all his plastic, takes it all down, demos it out, cleans it all up, you get your clearance testing, you don't have it back. What's your recommendation on what's happening in that work area? So are we shutting the job down for that 24 hours? I mean, even the project manager's not supposed to be in the work area.
The question is, after we've done the work and the cleanup and we've had the samples taken but we don't know the results, are we allowed to do anything in the workspace? Yeah, hypothetically, we're not really supposed to be in the workspace. We can probably play it by ear in certain regards. If you're working in this side of the room and you need to walk through this part of the room, probably no issue. If you're going to start really doing work, could be an issue because you might have to re-clean the whole space. You don't want to set up stuff. Okay. Okay, so let me just quickly review the project manager role. We need to know where any lead-based paint is in the building, which is based on our testing that we have. You should have a copy of the test. All of our workers and subcontractors need to know that too. We don't want the electrician suddenly cutting a hole across a wall that you know is covered with lead paint and they don't. Only specially trained and subcontracted contractors who have the right insurance and the right sign-offs can do this work on lead-based paint. We can't do the prohibited methods. We have to have signs and barriers. We have to protect everything with plastic. Make sure the workers are taking care of themselves. I actually have seen a couple of things lately where there are people working with no protection on. That's no good. Handle the waste correctly, wrap everything up, and make sure that everything gets HEPA vacuumed or wiped before it leaves the work area. Do a good cleanup. One of the things that EPA suggests is that we keep photos of the work being done so that we can verify that it was done. The company doing it has to sign a piece of paper that says they did it, but it'd be a lot better for us if we also had some pictures that they were actually doing it correctly. So we should do that. And particularly, we can take photos of the certifications, which are required to be on site. And then I'll get with you about some of the record keeping aspects down the road. Okay? To address John's question, yeah, keep everyone out of the work area until the testing is verified done. Any questions on lead paint? Go ahead.
The ones that are doing the abatement, do they remove all the, what they bag up? Do they remove it themselves?
That's the question is, do the people who are removing the stuff, do they take the bagged stuff off-site themselves?
Yes.
They can put it in a regular construction dumpster. You're supposed to have it in an inaccessible area. So I think a closed up dumpster is probably inaccessible enough to a kid, right? Yeah. So it can get disposed of in a normal construction waste disposal, unlike, for example, asbestos. Yeah. Good question. Any others? Okay.